I want to introduce you, give you something to think about. One of the most spooky thinkers of all time, Georges Bataille. Who is Georges Bataille? Georges Bataille was a French thinker who was fundamentally shaped by the events of World War I. He was influenced by thinkers like Heidegger and Alexander Kojève and Nietzsche. And like all three of those thinkers, maybe save Kojève, that's a little more difficult issue, he was interested in the question of the scandal, right, initiated by the First World War, or revealed by the First World War, is the fact that Western rationalism, this Western rational subject, cannot account for its own ground and cannot account for its own premises. But it's not just that. If the Western rational subject cannot account for its own ground and premises, why is it that there's still something going on in this realm of material premises, foundation? Bataille arrives at the scandalous insight that the highest strivings of human thought and the human mind somehow remain dialectically reducible or coincidental with the lowest and most abased reality. Bataille, this is Georges Bataille. He was actually pretty handsome, you know. Bataille's idea his whole shtick can be summed up in the expression that God is a whore, right? Which is a dream he himself had, and Lacan took note of the significance of. And the reason why he says this is because the idea of God, right, the metaphysical absolute, the highest, most profound and mysterious, absolute, divine being, is somehow nothing more than the most abased form of humanity, right, which is so-called God is a whore, right? He's not necessarily saying this as like an edgy atheist thing where he's saying like, oh, you know, I hate God and God is evil or whatever. His basic idea that he's trying to get at here is that we can go no farther in reality than this prostitute or whatever when we think about God, basically. That's how I interpret it. This is the reality of the divine. The highest and the lowest coincide with each other, right? Bataille is concerned with the question of the base, vulgar, material, and palpitating art behind the realm of appearances in reality. The vulgar and scandalous core of reality. Now, isn't that a little bit spooky? Well, it's no coincidence that he's associated with horror, because this is also an experience of horror, right? What is truly beyond the veil of reality, its base reality, is something horrifying. Bataille draws the distinction between the head and the body, right? And the symbol of Bataille's secret society, the accursed, whatever, is about headlessness. It's about a body that is somehow living, somehow subsisting and existing without a head. The meaning basically being this accursed and abased material reality that persists even after it's been removed of its head, its rationalization and way of being given meaning and form and so on and so on. It's kind of a vulgar Nietzschean materialism and kind of vulgar French materialism in a way, right? The famous expression of Bataille that struck me with the most importance. I want you to see this quote. This sums up his metaphysics, his ontology. This is the origin of accursed. It either comes from Bataille or Hegel. Oh, it's from Hegel. This is where they get the word accursed. It's from Hegel. Okay, I knew it. It's from Hegel. It's a beautiful quote. So it's about this kind of Nietzschean theme of the death of God. So here it is. Universal existence is unlimited and thus restless. It does not close life in itself, but instead opens it and throws it back into the uneasiness of the infinite. Here's the quote that struck me the most. I think it's from Hegel, but it's heavily associated with Bataille. Universal existence, eternally unfinished and acaphelic, meaning headless, devoid of a head. A world like a bleeding wound, endlessly creating and destroying particular finite beings. It is in this sense that true universality is the death of God. What does Bataille mean here? He means being, or universality, the truth of being, affirms itself when every finite horizon of being is transgressed, or somehow overcome, or contradicted, or negated. It is in this moment that you find the universality of all being. True universality is the death of God. When the head is repressed, the body proceeds. This was a very important stage in the development of my own thinking. I don't agree with Bataille. I completely reject him. But speaking of like the need to pass through the American era and David Lynch, I think this is an important part. I read Bataille through like David Lynch and stuff, you know, partially at least. Now, the most important parts of Bataille's work are concerning the question of since we're talking about transgression and this kind of stuff, it really gets into actually ecology, right? It's about waste and excess and expenditure and surplus and energy, right? And we're not going to be able to get into that today, but maybe we will later if this proves to be popular and people like this. But that's my short intro to Bataille.
For the French intellectual Georges Bataille, the harnessing and taming of excess is the true aim of all political economy. In his 1949 work, The Accursed Share, he develops a new theory oriented around consumption rather than production. To Bataille, all life...
Okay, you guys, did you just fucking hear that? Do you know why he's such an important thinker now? He just said a theory of consumption rather than production. You get where this is going? You get where this is going? Why he was so important for me too?
Only when the sun bleeds can we glimpse it. And when we can conceive of all energy from the first as a flow of excess, we understand that consumption, not production, is the major organizing force of human society and economics.
Did you hear that?
So, if everything on Earth contains an excess of solar energy, why...
The fucking idea is that we have this idea in our head that excess comes from our active production. But he's saying excess is a feature of reality itself. And human societies are about organizing the consumption. Consumption is where we actually organize, not production. And I like it because it's a non-voluntaristic view of production. It's a materialist view of production. Even if production is involved in the production of excess. Another form of this excess is, by the way, Marxist surplus value. Keep that in mind. You think of it in this kind of fatalistic way, where it's just something beyond your control. You don't control production, per se. It's really beautiful.
Why then do we see starving children, impoverished nations, and the like? Well, remember that Bataille's conception of excess extends even to seemingly fundamental aspects of life, like growth and reproduction. Individuals and groups may have to deal with want and lack, but man is not just the separate being that contends with the living world and with other men for his share of resources. The general movement of exudation, of waste, of living matter, destines him in a privileged way to that glorious operation, to useless consumption. In this way, the accursed share is a fundamental fact of the human condition. Normally, this excess leads to population booms and the further expansion of production. Life always aspires towards ever more growth, but when growth comes up against boundaries, geographic, demographic, etc., the excess can no longer be expelled, and it begins to boil. In the explosive character of this pressurized activity, we apprehend conflagrations befitting the solar origin of its movement. In other words, we can't get away from the heat of the sun. Its energy is always latent in everything we do. The curse of man is that, ignorant of these principles, we cannot direct our excess energy in a salvific way.
These men, Professor, these...
Think about CO2 emissions.
So-called men of vision, they would shackle the masses to a wheel and turn it till their backs break. All for that opiate. The lure of profit.
But what solution, my dear man? How to break a cycle? You cannot simply remove the promise of a better world for these unfortunates. We do not
The
need...
reason I'm critical of ecological leftists is they don't understand that excess is a feature of being. They think excess is something that is a human sin when we didn't start the fire. There's always been this excess that gives rise to what we call profit, that requires us to push beyond what we are, that requires us to want more than what we have. Because what we have is latent within excess itself. And the question is what to do with it.
To wait. We can bring forth paradise now. We can speed the passion. With only a small sacrifice, we can hold the apocalypse. With just a small sacrifice, we can free our shackles and deliver them to paradise now.
Mandis and Bataille actually share this hope, that a knowledge of general economy will lead man to develop for the first time a true self-consciousness. Without this intervention, our consumption demands extravagant wars and rampant inequality. And when civilizations in the past have tamed this pressure, it was often through ritual human sacrifice.
I am the jaguar-faced man. I am the feathered serpent. This priesthood is mine.
Mandis and Bataille share an obsession with the Aztec culture. For both, the fascination revolves around the centrality of human sacrifice.
It's not just that we're always desiring, we're always producing an excess beyond what we intend to produce. I think is more the idea.
To Aztec religion and society. In Aztec myth, the sun continually decays. The god Nanahuatzin sacrificed himself to bring light into the world, and now demands sacrifices of his own to sustain his existence. According to what Aztecs told the Spanish missionary and so-called first anthropologist Bernardino de Sahagún, men and wars were created so that there would be people whose hearts and blood could be taken, so that the sun might eat.
You guys see that? It's crazy shit. The Aztecs believed, according to this guy, that bloodshed needs to be taken so that the sun can consume. So Bataille's idea is that we're faced with this enigma of the sun giving without needing anything. It's just this flow of energy that doesn't even need anything to power itself. So the Aztecs thought that human bloodshed is what keeps the sun going.
Humanity is both the sun's waste product and its vital sustenance. Fascinatingly, the idea of a solar anus is present in many Mesoamerican words for gold. The Aztec word Teocuitlatl literally means excrement of the gods.
You guys fucking believe that? Did you know that? I want you guys to think about something for a sec. You guys ever asked the question of why was gold considered what it is? Because gold was always associated with the sun. That's why. That's why gold was valued historically. It was associated with the sun.
And the Maya word taquin is best rendered as sun shit.
Isn't that crazy?
Cultures from different language families independently arrived at the same conclusion as Bataille hundreds of years later, that everything of value is merely a solar accident. But why sacrifice? What does it do? In its original etymology, sacrifice only meant to make holy. Bataille writes, sacrifice
So the etymology of sacrifice meant to make whole. Isn't that weird? Sacrifice means you're getting rid of something, but the original etymology is to make whole. Sacrifice restores to the sacred world that which servile use has degraded, rendered profane. You know, I have a theory that all of Bataille's ideas were just in the context of the rise of American global Bretton Woods. It was a resistance to Anglo-Saxon utilitarianism. So let me tell you Bataille's idea. So Bataille was part of a secret society called the Ossiphile. And they are rumored to have literally sacrificed someone. They went next to a tree in the woods, and it's rumored, apparently, they sacrificed someone. And the person volunteered to be sacrificed. One of the reasons why Bataille has this fixation on the notion of sacrifice is that in our utilitarian world, where everything has a rational use or some kind of use, sacrificing something and just eliminating it purposelessly for no utilitarian reason, you just get rid of it, somehow restores to us our humanity and our basic sacred humanity, basically, as a being beyond an instrument. We're no longer just a tool or an instrument. If we sacrifice someone for no reason, we're proving that humanity doesn't exist to serve some utilitarian purpose. It's for its own sake. It's for itself. Could have just thrown away a pair of shoes. Well, the reason human sacrifice is so important to Bataille is because you're eliminating the human, because you're making the statement that this human does not serve a purpose, is not a tool. You're doing something to a person for no reason, just eliminating them, right? It's the idea. I don't think they actually sacrifice someone, but he writes about historical human sacrifice in this like transgressive, provocative way, but he's not actually sacrificing people. Like, come on, I don't believe he did. Satanic shit. Well, you know what my theory is? I think Bataille independently arrives at shit that like the ruling class actually does believe. That's what I really do think. That's why I like him, because it's like he's exposing the ruling class indirectly. Because I really do think they believe all sorts of crazy shit that somehow makes sense, you know? Human sacrifice is based? No. But this is a Halloween-themed theory stream. So let's get spooky. Why not?
Destruction is the best means of negating a utilitarian religion.
You see this? This is exactly what I was saying. Destruction is the best means of... In order to negate a relationship based on utility, that you're just using it for some other ends, you destroy it. You're proving that it's not a utilitarian relation. That's the basic idea.
This negation and the restoration of intimacy to human existence is what Bataille sees as the aim of all religion.
Bataille is a French. He's like a French reaction to American and Anglo-Saxon utilitarian consumerist global capitalism. He's very French as a thinker. He represents the French resistance to this. The French don't accept Anglo-Saxon utilitarianism. France is a real European civilization. It doesn't accept this idea of all of our values and all of our humanity being a mere utility to some kind of further ends. So I'm putting it into context.